everyone, welcome back to the Open Book Podcast. I'm your host Ren, and on this podcast we talk about all things bookish. And today we are diving back into the world of BookTok and talking about something which I've been thinking about for a while from lots of different perspectives. So I kind of wanted to talk about it because it is a massive thing on BookTok. Today we're going to dive into dark romance and what dark romance means and how it exists online and on TikTok. But before we get into that, if you guys are new here and want to talk about all things bookish with me, whatever platform you might be listening or watching on, please give us a like, subscribe. It really, really helps out the podcast. And I love talking about bookish things with you all. So, dark romance. I'm going to come at this from the perspective of someone who creates bookish content online and has been since 2013, from the perspective of someone who has lots of young humans in their lives. I've got my niece and my nephew, and I also have a lot of my friends' kiddos, so I am very aware of what they are reading, and I'll go into a conversation I actually had with my niece about this recently, which has sort of sparked this podcast episode. So I'm looking at it from that. I'm looking at it from the perspective of an ex-bookseller. And I'm also looking at it from the perspective of someone whose reading ability when I was a child was very ahead of the game when it came to reading. So I sometimes read books that were too old for me and that I shouldn't have been reading. If you are unfamiliar with dark romance is a subgenre of romance novels with darker themes and a lot more mature content. The plots are usually riddled with violence. They're, like mafia, romance, stalking, kidnapping. You would be an example of dark romance, I guess, and the characters are usually pretty morally grey. There's themes of BDSM in them. 50 Shades of Grey falls under dark romance, and a lot of the time consent is kind of not explicit. So they are pretty heavy books. They are books that should not be recommended lightly. Of course, there is absolutely nothing wrong with reading dark romance if that's what you want to read, if that is what you're into. We're not here to shame anybody. I don't think there's anything wrong if that's what you want to be reading. Go ahead, read it. You do you. That is, not my business if that's what you want to read. My problem comes with the way that this is being spoken about and the way that these books are being recommended. By it being called dark romance, I don't think it should have romance in the title at all. I don't think this subgenre should be called any form of romance because it isn't romantic. These stories aren't romantic stories. These stories are more often than not a man who is very significantly causing harm to someone, and that's quite scary that we stick romance as a subgenre within that, because I feel like calling it romance, even though it's called dark romance, does make it sound like it's something romantic, when that is very much not the case in the majority of these novels. They are being recommended with absolutely no discussion about it. BookTube obviously has been around for a while. I've been on BookTube for a while, but I still feel like the way that books were recommended on BookTube was a little bit better than when it comes to TikTok. Like, TikTok is so accessible, it's so quick. The books, people don't go into as much detail because they don't have as much time, whereas YouTube videos, people would be able to kind of go into huge detail and you'd be able to kind of grasp a little bit more what the book was about, whereas BookTok, everything's so quick. And what also is scary about BookTok is you've got the TikTok shop right there when people are recommending these books, and obviously with YouTube that wasn't always the case. There would have been links in the description, but the purchasing would not be as fast. TikTok shop being so there means that people are just buying these books with not full awareness of what they are about. I wouldn't even casually recommend books like this to my friends. I would always ask them if they were comfortable with different things if I read these books and was recommended them, and I know that my friends would do the same. So it's kind of, I find it kind of crazy that it's being so widely recommended. The other thing is there are some really young people on TikTok and there are some really young people reading these books, and I feel like there's lots of factors in this. My niece is very much like me in that when I was her age, I had a reading ability of quite a lot ahead of me, and so does she. So she's got a really good understanding of different books. But we were having a conversation the other day, and I was saying to her, just because you can doesn't mean you should, because it was her birthday recently and I bought her some Jacqueline Wilson books. So she wanted to then see the Jacqueline Wilson books that I had on my shelf, and I have a copy of Love Lessons, which I was gifted when I was 10 years old. Love Lessons is about a 14-year-old girl called Prue who goes to a school for the first time. She's always just been homeschooled, and she starts babysitting for one of her teachers, and then the lines are very blurred, and I believe they kiss, but I think that's all they do. Not that that's okay, she's a child and he's a teacher, but I don't think they sleep together. I think they kiss. It's in his car, I think. It's been a long time since I've read it. And basically, at the end of the novel, she has to leave the school and he faces no repercussions for anything that happened, which is scary because he is the person that was in the position of power, and she was a literal child who had been in her house for a long time and hadn't socialized, so didn't fully understand certain situations, and he put her in some very vulnerable situations. As an adult, I can read that and I can understand that that is horrific. Like, that is awful. He should have faced repercussions. That was not on her, that was all on him. When I was a child, I remember reading it and thinking, I shouldn't be reading this. And I'd just been bought this for my birthday because it was Jacqueline Wilson. And people thought Jacqueline Wilson was safe, but she's not, because she does write books for teenagers, and I was still very young and I shouldn't have been reading Love Lessons because it's a book for teenagers. My brain had no full understanding of what was happening. I knew that it felt wrong and that I shouldn't be reading it, but my reaction was nowhere near what it would be now and what it would have been if I'd have read it just even a few years later as a teenager, because I couldn't fully grasp things because my brain wasn't fully developed. And I was saying this to my niece, and I was saying, just because we can understand the words and just because we can understand the context doesn't mean that our brains fully can grasp what's going on yet. Because I didn't want to be like, I'm older and this is, but I wanted to explain it to her why it is still important that I look at the books that she's reading, why my brother and my sister-in-law look at the books that she's reading, and why it's important that we still are fully aware of the content that she's reading. Just because she can read to a higher level doesn't mean that we should be giving her books that are recommended for like 17, 18-year-olds and higher. Could read them, I have no doubt about it, but I feel like her brain would not fully process what was happening. And I am worried that that is what's happening with dark romance with a lot of teenagers and a lot of young people. But I see very young people leaving bookshops with these books, and I don't know if their brains fully understand that this is not romantic. You as well, people love Joe. Penn Badgley had to literally be like, he's a killer, like, please do not love this man. And I think that's where it's kind of quite problematic, and where it kind of falls is that if people do not have this understanding, then they're going to be reading these books and fully coming away thinking that this is romantic. Do you know the whole conversation about how if teenage boys watch porn, they have this really, and girls to be fair, they have this really misguided and wrong view of what sex should be like and how you should treat people, and there's no conversations about consent or anything in porn. So all of these things, and it gives this wrong impression of what it's actually like, and then that can obviously cause boys and men to then act like that. I'm worried that these books are doing the same thing. They are portraying this kind of wrong idea of what romance is and what is considered romantic. I'm seeing very young people saying, oh, but he's so hot and I'm thinking, this is literally breaking the law. He's doing something illegal. Like, the way his treatment is abusive and it is scary. And I feel like because they're being deemed as romance and because they're being so casually recommended, it's kind of diminishing the content a little bit. Haunting Adeline, I read that genuinely not realizing the extent of how bad it was because of how casually it's been recommended. And I definitely think there needs to be a little bit more like vetting when talking about these books and when talking about what is in these books, because there are some very young people buying and reading them, and that's really scary. I don't feel like bookshops are helping. They have BookTok tables, right? And on these tables are all of the popular books on BookTok. If someone says to their parent, if a teenager says to their parent, I would like this book for my birthday, I would like this book for Christmas. If you have a parent that's not really into reading, or if you have a parent who doesn't fully understand what's in these books, normally if someone asked for a book, you'd go into the shop and you would say, can I have this book? And you would be taken to the section. So like, you know, if you've got a teenager, then you know that the book that you're looking for should be in the young adult teen section, right? Same with if you've got a child and you're looking in the 5 to 8 or the 9 to 12. You go to that section. The problem with BookTok tables is that all of these books are just on one table. They're not in a section. So if people are going in and asking for these books, they're saying, oh, well, I'm going to find the BookTok table, or where's this? And they're not being taken to a section. They're just being taken to a table. They're not being, oh yeah, well, that'll be in the teen section, or that'll be in adult, like general fiction. They're just being taken to a table. So people don't actually know which categories these books fit in. And because there's like all a mixture of these books on these tables, it is not putting these books into a genre either. When you've got very dark romance books on the same table as books like Red, White and Royal Blue, that's not a good categorization. It doesn't paint a full picture of what this book is about. It doesn't give a good portrayal of the content of these books if you are mixing them and putting them on the same table when they are so vastly different. BookTok is not its own genre. It's not its own thing. You can't just put a book in the TikTok genre because they are very different books. They have to be like correctly put somewhere, or at least have more content warnings than they have. When I was a bookseller, someone actually came in and asked for the second ACOTAR book for their son who really liked them. So I went and got it for her because she was telling me that he'd read the first one and he loved it. And then she said he hasn't actually read anything since he left primary school. So I was like, how old's your son? And he was 13 and he'd been reading ACOTAR. So I then had to explain to her the content of ACOTAR, and she was mortified. She was like, oh my god, I had no idea, like I don't read, I had no idea what these books were about. I need to go and have some words with him and have a conversation with him, which I thought was, you know, really good. But this is the thing, like, these books are being recommended so casually to very young people, and I do feel like when you are recommending books, you have kind of a responsibility. Like it's up to people to find the triggers that they have. You know, you cannot cover everything because so many things are triggering and different things are triggering to different people. But I do feel like when you're recommending a book like this, you have to kind of mention it. But because he's been deemed as romance, I think that's why they're being recommended so casually. And the kind of attitude towards them is a little bit different. And I know that obviously some of these books do have relationships in them, but I do feel like there needs to be like a bigger conversation with. It can't just be this like, oh yeah, read this book in, you know, no sort of context. I feel like if you're recommending something which has really dark themes, then explain that. You know, I've barely seen anyone say about what Haunting Adeline was about, actually fully about, when they recommended it and what was in it. It was quite a shock to the system when I read Haunting Adeline, to be honest. And I'm an adult that was able to do my own research, and it was still a shock to me. So there's a lot of stuff going on in these books that are being then advertised, and very young people are reading them and not grasping what they are reading, and it's causing kind of adverse effects. You wouldn't do it with a movie, you know. There are movies have ratings for a reason, and I never want to like hinder someone's reading or say someone can't read something, but I definitely think there needs to be kind of more vetting, especially with how dark romance is growing. It's a genre which is growing very, very rapidly. People are very into it, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with being into it, but it's kind of it is crazy to me that it's so simplified. The kind of conversations around it are really kind of quite simple, and people are not talking about it to the extent of what is actually in these novels. And also like the influencing, it's such a big thing now, and it's where like loads of young impressionable people get recommendations for things, which is great. Like I love talking about books online, and it's great when people are like, I read this book because of you. That's lovely. But because of the kind of rate in which things are growing, do you feel like there needs to be a little bit more of a conversation, and we need to be a little bit more like careful and understanding about what is in these books and who should be reading these books. These books are heavy. There are some heavy themes in these novels, and I just don't feel like that's being very portrayed very well. I would love to know everyone else's thoughts. This is no hate to anyone that likes to read dark romance. Knock yourselves out. Like genuinely, there's no like shame. It's just kind of the way it's being portrayed. And it's the same with like publishers and stuff. Like, publishers are changing book covers to make them look more appealing, and it's not showing the extent of what the book is actually like. That, you know, covers are being changed and they look really cutesy, but they are not cutesy books at all. And I saw a few people kind of complaining about that recently, about how it gives a completely false portrayal of what the book is like, because they want to market it and make it look like other books that are doing well on TikTok. So I think that the conversation is kind of lying on different levels. You know, there should be a responsibility from publishers, and there should be a responsibility from bookstores and the way that these books are advertised. But I also think if you're talking about these books, there should also kind of be a level of responsibility there as well, just kind of explaining a little bit more what is in these books and who these books are predominantly for and aimed at. So yes, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like I said, if you guys want to come and chat bookish with us, then please like this podcast, follow on the different platforms. You can come and watch the video version on YouTube, and on YouTube I make other videos about books and pop culture, so we can talk about things on there. Let me know your thoughts on this week's episode, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.